Hello, welcome to Go Time. My name's Dylan. This is my 4AG KE70 Corolla, and today I am trying to fix a problem, a huge problem with the way that this car drifts and the way that I drive. And it's going to be a bit of a journey of discovery, and I'm going to try and learn some things along the way and maybe try and teach some things if I even know them. But it's going to be all about this car this episode, and hopefully about making it a way more fun car to drift. So I've run into a problem with this car, and that's that it is really unstable in drift. It's really sort of wobbly. If you watch back on the footage of me driving, it's sort of very, every steering input has a wobble with it. And what that has to do with, I think, is that I've got a lot of front grip. I run A86 power steering knuckles in it, which are a standard road-going car's standard knuckles. So they have a lot of Ackerman, where in a corner, the inside wheel is going to turn more than the outside wheel. This is not really great for drifting necessarily, because it means that when we're drifting, we're going around the corner and they're pointing in different directions. This inside wheel is just going to be dragging. And when we've got a high amount of grip in the front of the car like this, it's going to do a few things. One of them is that it's going to put me at risk of spinning out. It's going to make it a lot harder not to spin out. It's also going to slow the car down, so I'm not going to be able to keep up with people who maybe have better setups, and it's just going to look lame. I'm not going to be able to do big fast entries that look cool and whatever. I'm going to have to keep it shallow in the angle and not throw as much angle or do big entries and stuff like that. It also means that mid-corner, when my two wheels are pointing different directions, I've got a massive amount of toe out. So that's going to induce a whole lot of instability. Every time that this inside wheel has any sort of interaction over the ground, it's going to induce a whole lot of instability and a whole lot of wiggling the car around, threatening to spin me out, everything like that. So essentially what I'm going to have to do, if I'm going to keep trying to run sticky tires in the front, is either reduce the amount of Ackerman that I have in the car, or try and tune my suspension to work with the high amount of Ackerman that I do have. And I'd love to change to a lower Ackerman steering setup, but I'd like to try this first. Now, what I'm going to try and do is a thing called jacking. I learnt about it from a couple of episodes of Drift Crash, an old YouTube channel, this British guy Mido. I'm going to link these two videos down below. They talk a lot about Naoki Nakamura and Team Burst's drift setups in Japan, or just how to set up a car for Mayhem, or how Japanese guys set up their drift cars and how that's different from the Western world. So what you do is you work with the inertia of the car, moving over onto the outside of the car as you transition, and you try and pull that front wheel off the ground. What that does is it puts all the weight into this outside wheel, as well as puts it into the back of the car, so you're steering more with the back of the car and you're using this wheel that's doing all the right things. I'm going to be doing this with a bit of a seemingly counterintuitive coilover tuning setup, wherein I use the base height adjustment of the coilover to put the damper all the way down as low as it'll go, and then pump up the spring perch so that I get back to the ride height I desire, and then meaning that the damper has as little droop as possible. So it's going to be able to compress as much as it likes when it hits a bump, but once it sort of gets unloaded, it's just going to lift up as soon as it can. This is not something you'd necessarily think was an intelligent way to set up a sports car, but this is in fact a drift car, and to build a drift car, sometimes you have to do some very unintelligent things. So let's do that. So there's full droop, there's ride height. So I've got it all the way at the bottom there, bottomed out, but I don't want it to seize in there, so I'm just going to wind it off a touch, because I hate having seized coilovers. And now I'm going to wind this spring perch up until we get to ride height. Alright, well, I've done that. I've set it to full drop on the base height and I've jacked up the spring perch until it's at the right height I had before. So I'm gonna see how it feels really quick. So I did test the way that suspension setting worked for the car, and I'm very excited to say that it feels like night and day, like so much better, which is awesome because I was sort of thinking I'd have to change a fair bit of stuff, but honestly, still with these super grippy tires on the front, still at regular pressure, now that it's not dragging that inside wheel so badly, it's just so much more predictable on entry. Like I feel like I can just throw it and just sort of float it in and it feels awesome. So that's a huge relief. Now that I'm feeling like the steering is feeling good and I'm not necessarily thinking that I should get some modified knuckles that have more lock inbuilt into them, I'm going to throw in these Beam Speed Shop rack spacers that'll give me just a touch more lock. And then I've got these toe plates I just bought, and I'm going to align the toe on this car for the first time in years. So that's super exciting. I'm going to throw these lock spacers in and give it an alignment. Now that these spacers are in, I've got to try and center this rack so I can get my steering wheel pointing straight at the right time. So I'm going to go fully to one side, measure the distance between here and there, which is 168. So half of 168 is 84. So we'll get this to 84 millimeters. And that way we'll get even throw in each direction. And we'll put the steering wheel straight. You might be able to see here, I'm actually running into a bit of an over-centering issue. So consistent, and then that falls into full lock there. And there was previously a lock stopper welded to these standard XT130 LCAs, but they have been cut off to get more lock because that's what you use extended LCAs for anyway. I think it's actually worse on this side. So it's sort of consistent pressure, and then falls into full lock, which we don't want because it means that once it's at full lock, it doesn't want to come back out. It'll just want to stay at lock, which is a surefire way to get yourself spun out. So I might end up welding a new lock stopper there, just adhesive, so that it doesn't over center like that as sort of an interim fix, so I can get as much lock as possible until it starts to become an issue. But for the moment I'm just going to align it and make sure that's all working, and I'll see how it feels. Though we are running into that over centering issue, it is good to know that at full lock I've got a completely free spinning wheel, which is great. So it's not running into anything at full lock. It's not running into the tension rod, it's not running into the frame rail, so I don't need any spacers or anything like that. So that's good. It could possibly run into something while it's at compression, but this thing has so little suspension travel that I think it will be fine. Cool as. So I've never used these before, toe plates, but I think they're pretty straightforward. Just get one plate either side, use two of the same tape measures so we know that they're measuring the same. So what we do is we take our two tape measures in each of our toe plates and we measure the distance between the two toe plates and read the difference between the front and the rear, and that will give us how many millimeters of toe in or toe out we have. And I think what I'm going to do is set it to about 0 toe, or just maybe a hair of toe out. Cool. So after a bunch of fiddling, I've got it to about 1 mil or 1.5 mil of toe out, which is what I want, just a hair of toe out. Gonna whip it around, see how it feels. So I threw the car up in the air to do up the jam nut on the tie rod and do up the little bracket that holds it shut. And I was sort of under here having a look and thinking, and I've come to the conclusion that I reckon I will throw a bit more caster into this and hope that that maybe relieves some of our over-centering issue we're having with the steering lock. And also because I do have a lot of room here, I'm not going to run into this guard anytime soon, and I feel like it'll feel good. I do like how it steers at the moment, but it could do with a little more caster, so I'll give it a whirl. And if you don't know what caster is, it's basically the angle of the front strut forward and back. And the further forward that it's leaning, the more that the wheel pushes the car up into the air as it rotates, so the more that it wants to be centered, and therefore when you let go of the steering wheel, it's going to center itself again. So it's going to have what we call self-steer, or just it'll need less steering input in order to return to center, which is usually a good thing during drifting. It means that we feel like we can let go of the steering wheel and feel safe and comfortable. So I'm going to do that by adjusting this, which is called the tension rod or the caster rod. And it's just a matter of unjamming these two, doing this nut up in this direction and also doing this nut up in that direction so it pulls the lower control arm forward. And yes, I will probably have to check my toe after this again, which is a little silly, but get that on the big jobs. So here is the lock before the spacers. And here is the lock afterwards. So I've double checked the toe and tightened everything up. I'm going to see how this is feeling, just sort of driving around normally. Pretty light on center, which I'm not feeling good about. Steering wheel is not completely straight. Oh my god, it turns so tight. That's wild. Yeah, super light in the center. I think maybe I'm used to a bit more toe out. Interesting. It's a bit of a shame because I just drove it the other night and it felt amazing, and then I was like, I'm going to do more stuff to it, which is, that always works. When you make it feel good, just do stuff until you make it feel bad. Yeah, shit. So I've made the alignment feel a bit better. I put a bit more toe out into it. I took a bit of caster out of it because it wasn't really feeling good to me. I guess I'm used to a lot less caster. So I've put it back almost to where it was before. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and stop this over-centering issue that I'm experiencing, because I want to get as much lock as I can out of this thing, but I don't want it to get stuck at full lock, because that is going to be a bad situation and potentially cause me to crash and burn. So I'm going to cut off this remnants of the old lock stopper and weld a nut onto here, and then either the nut will be enough to stop it, or I will put a bolt into it, and that will stop it from over-centering, hopefully. So I think these are the nuts I'm going to use. I'm going to weld them right about there, and hopefully just the nut will be enough. If not, I'll screw a bolt into it. I've got those lock stoppers in. I'm just going to whack the wheel on and see if it feels like it's going to be enough to stop this over-centering. I did feel the effects of that over-centering a bit when I was reversing around to get the car back into the workshop. And I feel like, yeah, as much as it's mad to have as much lock as you can get, got to be careful to have everything balanced. All right. So, yeah. Oh, that feels a lot better. Yeah, sick. Comes off both sides of lock quite easily. Have we sacrificed much lock? Not heaps. It's a bit, but much better than getting stuck. Cool, I'm happy with that. All of this adjustment is quite interesting to me as a concept because it's pretty much antithetical to how I was running the car before. I used to run it where it was basically full stiff. I wanted it to sit as flat as possible. I thought that pulling all the grip out of the back and having the whole car sit super flat was the best way to go. And it might be if I had almost zero Ackerman knuckles in the front, it could just sit and sort of float and do that sort of thing. But it's not the style of driving that I've ever wanted to do. So it's interesting sort of thinking about this stuff for the first time ever and realizing I had the car set up all wrong. So I pretty much had my dampers set to full stiff or full fast. And what I mean by that is when setting these dampers, the soft and the hard setting is really just a balance between how quickly the damper is controlling the kinetic energy stored in the springs. So say for instance, you're doing a little flick, you're doing a left-right motion. I kind of want it to be where I'm in that left drift and I'm loading up that rear right spring, and then I'm actually able to use that potential energy stored in the spring to fling the car into the right-hand drift. That's a philosophy supposedly they use on the cars at Mayhem, which it makes a lot of sense to me. And if I'm going for that kind of setup where I am trying to think about the transfer of the load throughout the car in my drifts and in my transitions, I think, you know, starting from a baseline where I'm setting all of my coilovers to pretty much the slowest or the softest setting they can be, then I'm going to try and utilize the potential energy being stored in the springs as much as possible and really think about the transfer of that load and how it's having an effect on the car. And if I just start at the softest or the slowest setting, then I can work my way back up from there and see what feels good. But it's already starting to feel heaps better, so I'm super, super excited about that. All of this is in preparation for my favorite time of year, halfway hangs, which is in February, early next year. And I'm hoping to have this car really solid and really well set up for that, as well as I'm really hoping I can get one of these front valences done for the event, because I almost can't bear to look at the car without it on now. So it would be really sick to have one ready for the event and really show it off and hopefully get some interest in a pre-order or picking one up for other people's Corollas. But yeah, prepping for halfway hangs, I'll be doing hopefully 3 days of driving. I'll be driving the Get Down, which I've driven a few times, as well as I'm driving with my drift team, the Beam Speed Shop drift team. That's me and 4 other guys who are involved in Beam Speed Shop. So it should be heaps and heaps of fun, but I just got to make sure the car's pretty dialed before I get there, because every time I've gone up there, the car's sort of been, only half-assed setup. With that, I would like to make my car just a touch louder, or quite a bit louder, because mine's always one of the quietest 4AGs on track. I've got this little hot dog muffler that I want to put in the back as a little sort of industrial cannon. I feel like that might look cool on my car. As well as I've got small hopes of being able to get my LSD into the back of this. I've got a T-Series diff housing over there that needs cleaning up. And I've got this, it's actually a TRD two-way, not an OS Geiken, but that's okay. But yeah, really hoping to get that done. And then, after halfway hangs, I also have a set of these, which I'd really like to put on. And I've got some theories on how I might be able to run ITBs, but still use manifold absolute pressure instead of tuning with what's called alpha N, which is how you'd usually tune ITBs, and it's a bit of a pain. So yeah, hopefully next year, ITBs, LSD, front lip, all this suspension tuning, making it a heaps better car to drive. This thing might be an absolute weapon, which I would be really excited about. I'm kind of starting to get to the point where I might be able to realize some of my biggest sort of boyhood dreams in owning a Corolla, which is making something that's absolutely off its head, ITBs, screaming, looking crazy. So I'm super excited for that. It's going to take a lot of work, but I've got most of the bits to get all this done. So I hope you're excited with me. And I hope you enjoy the process as I get through it kind of slowly but surely. But yeah, that's me. I'm Dylan. This is Go Time. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. If you want to support the channel, I do have a website up. It's gotime-co.com. But that's me. Thanks for watching. All the best. Goodbye.